Hello and welcome to the White House today. It is so wonderful to see all of you. My name is Angela Barranco. I'm the Associate Director for Public Engagement at the Office of the White House Office Council on Environmental Quality. And thank you so much for joining us here today. We are just so proud and so happy to host you, and thank you for everything that you have done. From California to our own backyard, we have leaders here today who are forming the foundation for sustainable and climate-smart development within the agriculture sector in a time where we are seeing the impacts of climate change more frequently and with greater intensity. These champions of change are committed to growing awareness and understanding of the impacts of climate change on agriculture. You are all here today because you have demonstrated clear leadership in the implementation and innovation in agricultural production and education. As we look for solutions to pressing environmental challenges, from climate change to responsible resource use, we need to engage our agricultural communities, harness and help share their sense of responsibility for our planet's well-being. Because it is these traits that translate into some phenomenal, sustainable, and climate-smart agriculture work. So congratulations to all the champions here today. Thank you for all of you for joining us here today. And we just want to remind you that this event is live streamed. So you're out there in the universe talking about all the great work that you're doing. And please feel free to use our 2 Twitter hashtags we're using today, and I'll say them twice so you remember. It's hashtag WHChamps, as well as hashtag ActOnClimate. So tweet some pictures, tweet some stories, and make sure to, well, when you get internet access then. I'll repeat them again later on so you won't forget. And make sure you tell your stories, because that's what you're all here to do, is to really tell us about all the great work you're doing. So I now have the honor to introduce a colleague and friend, the White House Council on Environmental Quality's Chief of Staff, Chris Adamo. He will be giving welcoming remarks. As a former staff director within the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, and a former top advisor to Senator Stabenow, you will have actually the pleasure to hear from her a little bit later. Chris is an avid outdoorsman and has an extensive background in agriculture. And he is going to give you great insight into the administration's efforts to enhance sustainability and natural resource management across our country's expansive farmland. So please put your hands together for Chris Adamo.
Welcome, good afternoon. As Angela said, my name is Chris Adamo. I'm Chief of Staff for Council on Environmental Quality. And on behalf of our Managing Director, Christy Goldfuss, on the Council of Environmental Quality, and President Obama, good afternoon and thank you for being here. And a quick congratulations to our honorees and our champs of change who have made the long distance travel to be here with us today. And we really look forward to hearing your stories and having a good discussion along the way. So thank you again. As Angela mentioned, I've had the good fortune to work on agriculture and conservation policy over the past 10 years of my career here in the U.S. Senate and now with the White House. And this is one of my favorite set of issues, honest to God. I love agriculture and I love conservation. I love how they come together. It is one of the most fun worlds to be in and watch and observe and learn from many folks like yourselves about what is possible on the ground. And one of the things I love about events like today is we're here to talk about solutions. We're here to talk about things that work for everybody, whether it's increasing your yields, increasing your resilience on the farm or ranch, or whether it be talking about habitat for wildlife, cleaner water, cleaner air, or obviously solutions for climate change. These are things that farmers and ranchers are already doing in many cases, and in other cases, there are new innovations, new technologies coming online, which are really exciting to see. And for someone like myself, being out on the ground to see and learn about them, there is actually something, well, let me just say, I get very excited and I love being out there. And it's a lot more fun than the office. So anybody have a tour or farm or ranch, I'm willing to be there and check it out. So we can follow up on that later. But that said, again, I've had this fantastic opportunity to see a lot of the movement and a lot of the changes come together for these types of climate sustainable friendly, agriculture friendly solutions over the past few years. And we've seen a lot of good movement, a lot of good solutions that work for a lot of different producers. And it's my pleasure and my honor today to introduce our first speaker, Secretary Tom Vilsack, who I have had the pleasure to work with him and his team over the past few years as we've written a farm bill in 2014 and just work and understand the day-to-day advocacy and leadership that Secretary Vilsack has shown for rural America and America as a whole on so many of these great issues. Probably little-known facts about Department of Agriculture and Secretary Vilsack, and these are some of the things that I reflect on as I've been able to work on these issues. Not very many folks know that the largest conservation budget in the United States, the largest single amount of resources and investments, reside in the Department of Agriculture. Secretary Vilsack has been absolutely phenomenal over the years leading this budget and these teams that we have working for us. Something else that not a lot of folks know is that over the past 6 years, this administration and Secretary Vilsack leading the way, we have had more national initiatives across this landscape on voluntary conservation efforts that benefit farmers, ranchers, foresters, and the public as a whole. We see them out west working on drought resiliency. We see them obviously with our sage grouse and lesser prairie chicken work on endangered species. We see it along our Mississippi waterway and system as we work to reduce water and nutrient runoffs. And we see it in a lot of our big ecosystems, such as the Great Lakes, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Everglades. Those are just some of the big ones that come to mind when I think of all the great national initiatives that President Obama and Secretary Vilsack have started over the years. So this is very exciting stuff. We are entering a new frontier, in my opinion, when it comes to conservation, sustainability, and climate solutions for agriculture. And we're just getting started. So with that, I will turn it over to Secretary Vilsack, and thank you for being here.
Chris, thanks very much. And Senator Stabenow was extraordinarily well served when you were at the helm, and certainly the President is fortunate to have you at CEQ. I also want to express my thanks to all who are here, but let me start with a more general thank you. I want to thank you for the contribution you make as producers. I think far too few Americans appreciate and understand what they have in American agriculture. Those of us who chose not to farm for a living were able to do so because we have delegated the responsibility of feeding our families to a relatively small percentage of America. The success of American agriculture has allowed and freed the rest of us to consider other options and other opportunities with our lives. It's created an incredible amount of freedom and liberty in this country. In addition, the producers are so efficient, so effective, that when we walk out of our grocery stores, we actually have more money in our pocket as a percentage of our income than anybody else in the world. So we not only have the freedom to do what we wish, but we also have the resources to expand our economy through consumer purchases that would otherwise be directed towards food purchases. So American agriculture is a great success story and not fully appreciated and recognized, unfortunately, I think, across the country. And obviously, I want to thank you for the work that you all are doing and continues to do to focus on solutions to make our agriculture more climate friendly, to make it more resilient, to ensure that we adapt and mitigate to the changing aspects of agriculture as a result of climate change. And there is no question that folks on the ground understand and appreciate that there are and will continue to be significant changes in the way we produce and how we produce, based in part on what the climate is doing. We see the effects of this right now with more intense storms, longer droughts, more difficult flooding, more significant pests and diseases that are now being dealt with in part because of a changing climate. So the President has put a focus, and appropriately so, on making America more resilient to all of the impacts and effects of climate. So today we honor and acknowledge your contribution to that effort. Which is, I think, pretty doggone important, and we certainly appreciate what you're doing, appreciate that you have taken time from your schedules to be here at the White House. We're honored to have you. I think it is appropriate for me at this point to explain a little bit about what we are doing in this space, because I find as I travel around the country, as I did recently in my home state of Iowa, that very few people do fully appreciate what's going on in terms of climate and in terms of this administration. And I think after I get finished outlining some of the steps that we've taken, you might be hopefully reassured that we are very focused on this and very committed to it. One of the things we've done is to establish climate hubs. In 7 specific locations across the country, we team up with our Agricultural Research Service, NRCS, and the Forest Service to study precisely what the vulnerabilities are in each region of the country in terms of crop production, livestock production, horticulture production, and basically try to determine what we can do about it. What are the vulnerabilities? What are the techniques and technologies that can be used to allow us to adapt and mitigate? We also have 3 sub-hubs which are focused on forestry, specialty crop production in the Caribbean, so that we cover the entire continental U.S. As well as some of the territories. So we're in a position to provide information to producers wherever they might be and forest landowners wherever they might be to make appropriate steps in their production processes to adapt and mitigate. We have heavily invested time and resources in renewable energy production. I think it's surprising to some when I tell them, as we are today, announcing over 1,000, actually specifically 1,114 projects that we're funding today, announcing today, $71 million in grants, over $100 million in loans to these renewable energy projects, including 17 anaerobic digesters. This brings to a total of 110 digesters that we have helped to finance as we try to look for ways, creative ways to capture methane from livestock production and to use it effectively to produce power and energy. Over the course of this administration, we have invested in over 10,750 renewable energy projects. So this is a commitment that we have made. The projects, either in terms of energy efficiency or in terms of energy production, have saved or produced 8.4 million megawatt hours. I didn't know what a megawatt hour was until I had this job. But that's enough electricity to basically take care of 750,000 homes on an annual basis, just from the smaller Renewable Energy for America program projects. All told, we have spent through grants and loans $750 million in an effort to try to focus on renewable energy. The President instructed all of his cabinet to take climate change seriously and particularly to look at ways in which we could potentially reduce the emissions that are being produced in our economy. And agriculture, while it's doing a particularly good job relative to its international colleagues, we're about 9% of overall U.S. emissions. Internationally, agriculture is about 14% of emissions. We can do better, and the President challenged us to look at ways in which we could do better. And so we recently announced an effort, which we refer to as the 10 building blocks, for agriculture that will allow us to double the rate of emission reductions. Currently, we're basically reducing our emissions by roughly 60 million metric tons. We want to get to 120 million metric tons in the next decade or so. And that really involves a greater commitment to soil health and soil conservation, concerted effort on things like cover crops. We've had a 350% increase in the number of acres enrolled in cover crop activity, better nutrient management, providing our producers with information so they know the right rate, the right amount, the right time, and the right location, and the right method for applying nutrients to the ground, more efficient irrigation, particularly in drought-stricken areas, rotational grazing for our livestock operations, focus on renewable energy, and one of my favorites, looking at ways in which we can continue to sequester carbon that's been stored in wood, particularly diseased wood. We have 45 million acres of diseased trees in our national forest system. We've got to figure out a way to use that, and we just recently announced a tall wood building contest where we have provided resources for a 10-story construction project in New York City and a 12-story construction project in Portland that will be made solely from wood. Structural materials that are made from cross-laminated timber. It's a new technique that basically is much stronger, more fire retardant, if you can believe that, than steel and concrete, and we think it's going to revolutionize multi-story construction in this country. All of this is designed to create more resilience, greater opportunity in agriculture and forestry so that we can do a better job of mitigating and adapting to a changing climate and reducing the emissions from our agriculture and forestry section. Heavily involved in research. This is obviously something that we invest a substantial amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars of looking at creative ways to give you the tools and the techniques to do an even better job. One of the things that we're probably going to learn from you all today are opportunities that we might consider for future research projects. Several $100 million has been committed from our research budget at USDA. We have a thing called Conservation Innovation Grants, which I would encourage you to take a look at. We've used these grants in a variety of ways, most particularly and recently to take a look at how we might be more efficiently utilizing our conservation practices to deal with drought. One of my favorite research projects, not necessarily in the Conservation Innovation Grant area, but consistent with that, is figuring out how to capture fog more effectively. Never knew you could capture fog, but you can, and we've actually developed a coding system for the mechanism that captures fog, so it creates larger droplets that has more impact and effect in terms of scarce moisture to apply to trees and plants, particularly out in the California area. This is an example of the kind of creative thought process that we're engaged in. We're using our Conservation Reserve Program, our CRP program, not just to basically encourage land that is highly erodible not to go into production, but also utilize it to increase pollinator activity. Again, the President very much focused on this. I will tell you probably the most interesting conversation I have had with the President in the Oval Office was a result of an event. I was in a meeting. The President asked me to stop by the office after I was finished to talk for a few minutes. I was explaining to him what we were doing at USDA, and he looked at me and he said, "Do you mind if I ask you something off topic?" And I'm thinking to myself, I'm in your office, the Oval Office. You're the President of the United States. You can ask me whatever damn well you want to ask me. He said, "What about the bees? What about the bees?" And we had this conversation about pollinators and the work that we were doing in terms of trying to better understand the complexity of the impact on pollinators. There's a tendency, I think, on the part of some folks to pigeonhole this into one reason or another why we've seen a decline in pollinators. There are many reasons for it. And if you're going to be serious about solutions, you have to look at the totality of circumstances. But I like the idea that the President of the United States was concerned about this. But I must say that as I talked to him, I was thinking to myself, is he really, I mean, as a leader of the free world, is he, really focused on this? As I left the meeting, his chief of staff was there, and I asked Dennis, I said, "Dennis, he sort of asked me about pollinators. Is he really, really serious about this?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." He says, "We have conversations about this all the time because there's the First Lady's garden involves a beehive or two, and he's very focused on the health of those bees." So that's the kind of president you have, which is why you're here today. He's taken a look at every aspect of sustainability and every aspect of how we are having to deal with a changing climate. And we want to equip producers across the country with tools and information that will allow them to better understand the consequences of all this to their individual operations. So we have come up with ways in which you can quantify emission and carbon sequestration capacities from various conservation practices. We think that creates a whole new market opportunity for conservation, a thing called ecosystem markets that we're investing heavily in. The opportunity to basically say to a regulated industry, if you need a conservation result, if you need greenhouse gas reduction, one way you can do this is by investing in conservation, in farmland conservation. Most recently, Chevrolet announced an activity of purchasing carbon credits on 50,000 acres of land in North Dakota in order to satisfy a corporate responsibility that they established as part of their corporate sociability effort. And the reality is that there's a lot of this going on, and we want to be supportive of it, and we want to provide folks with the tools and the information that will allow them to make appropriate calculations. One last thing I want to emphasize today, and this is I think a very important conversation that we need to have in this country and in agriculture in particular. Food and agriculture, food production, food in general, ought to be a conversation and a topic that unites people. If you think about your own families, during the holiday season when you get together, what is it that you get together to do? You get together most often to sit around the table, to eat and to share. It's a unifying opportunity. It brings people together. For far too long in agriculture, we have had a more divided conversation. And it frankly makes it more difficult for someone like myself who wants to showcase the importance of agriculture to the rest of the country if agriculture is talking to itself as opposed to the other 99.9% of America that doesn't farm. And if our conversation is going to be one where we are dividing ourselves into camps, then it becomes an even more complicated conversation. The word sustainable is an interesting word and one that is often used in connection with agriculture And I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to have a common definition of what that actually means, that we all buy into and that we all advance, so that we can have a unifying conversation about agriculture, so that we can celebrate agriculture as opposed to having concerns about it. And I would certainly hope that the leaders that we're acknowledging today, folks who have influence in their local communities, take this opportunity to figure out ways in which they can help unify people over food and agriculture as opposed to dividing us. I think we would do the country a great service with that kind of conversation, and I think it might potentially lead to other ways in which we can bring this country together instead of constantly looking at conflict and lack of consensus, particularly in a town like Washington, D.C. So I hope that you think about that. I hope that you look for opportunities to help us amplify the message that there is a tremendous amount of progress taking place in agriculture to be celebrated. There's a tremendous opportunity in agriculture for young people to be celebrated. And I think it's important and necessary that we use this opportunity to bring people together because we've got a good story to tell. You have a good story to tell. And I'm sincerely hopeful that you use this opportunity, that you will be showcased in your communities as a result of this acknowledgement of your efforts to spread the word on that. All right, so with that, I'm supposed to turn it back over to folks, and then they're going to introduce Champions of Change, and then we're going to come together for a photograph. Is that right?
That's right.
I don't have to have a photograph of Pam, do I, right there? She's a troublemaker.
Well, thank you, Secretary Vilsack. We are so incredibly proud and happy to have you here join us today. So thank you for celebrating these incredible champs with us. Our Twitter feed is already lighting up, guys, so get on it. Remember to use your hashtag WHChamps and act on climate. So I would also now like to hand it over to Christy Goldfuss. She's the Managing Director of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Prior to joining the Council on Environmental Quality, Christy was Deputy Director of the National Park Service and a great leader in conservation. Christy leads the White House in developing and working to implement meaningful environmental policies and initiatives, and has made it her personal mission with all of us to protect our nation's land and water. Christy will now introduce you to the stars of our show today, our sustainable and climate-smart agriculture champions of change. Please welcome Christy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. It is definitely a difficult act to follow, Secretary Vilsack, who is really the best leader that we have in terms of agriculture for the administration and all the work that you do. So I won't take too much time before I start introducing all of the leaders today, but to tell you that the Council on Environmental Quality is responsible for advising the President on environmental issues. But one of the other major pieces of business that we do is engage with the public on all of those environmental issues. And we get to meet leaders like yourselves in that work. And it really is quite an honor to talk about the administration's priorities, but then to hear from you the incredible work that's going on. When I first started in this position about 9 months ago, I had the opportunity with my team to work with one of the nonprofits that some of you may be familiar with, Field to Market, and hear some of the incredible innovation that's happening out there. Innovation to us, but for some of you, you've been working on it for such a long time, so it's just common practice. But in that continuum of what happens out on the ground all the way to DC, it was so exciting that it planted the seeds for this very event to look out there and see what great practices were happening, what leaders were out there, and who we could really highlight to say what phenomenal work is being done. As we are at this point at the end of the administration, looking for those leaders who can talk about and reflect the work and the change that we want to see in the world. We're about a month, 6 weeks away from a very important meeting in Paris, France, even farther away from all the work that's being done out there in the field. But as we look at every single sector across the United States, we see all sorts of private industry stepping up to really take action on climate, and we want to highlight the leaders in each of those sectors, and that's why you're here today, so we can highlight all of your work. Now, I'm going to apologize up front if I ruin anybody's names, but I think we're doing pretty well. Nothing too complicated here. But I'm going to run through each champ and a little bio on the work that they do. I'd ask you to come up and stand in front of the table. We're going to have all 12 folks in front, and then at the end, just stay where you are, and Secretary Vilsack and I will join you for some photographs, okay? All right, so apologies for having to read this, but I'd like to start out with our first champ. William Buddy Allen is a leader in agriculture and conservation, a producer from Mississippi. Mr. Allen has broad experience in agriculture sustainability and is actively involved in several agriculture businesses, focusing his time and capital implementing soil and water conservation practices on his own rice farm. Let's have a round of applause for Buddy Allen. Larry Kundal is a fourth-generation rancher in Wyoming and Vietnam War veteran who manages his land for increased productivity while prioritizing the protection of natural resources and wildlife. He has added miles of water lines for better water use, led efforts to help ranchers unite to sell wind leases, and was one of the first ranchers in the state to sell carbon credits. Larry? Herman Trey Hill is a grain farmer in the heart of Maryland's Chesapeake Bay watershed who has operated his family farm since 1999. Under Mr. Hill's direction, the farm has adopted leading technologies that utilize on-the-go monitoring of crop health and implemented best practices including nutrient management plans and planting cover crops on 100% of its acres. Mr. Hill? Loretta Joss operates an organic dairy farm in south central Minnesota. Along with her husband, Martin, whose great-grandfather settled the area in the late 1800s, Ms. Joss has taken action to combat soil erosion and implement other sustainable activities on the 400-acre farm that have dramatically reduced runoff while increasing permeability of the soil and the diversity of the birds and butterflies on the farm. Loretta? Jesus Sanchez manages a 4,000-acre tomato, wheat, garbanzo, and garlic farm in California. Mr. Sanchez has been able to make building better soil a central theme of his business philosophy and implement a number of innovative conservation agriculture practices that have resulted in considerably less use of diesel fuel, lower emissions of dust, increased soil carbon, and reductions in soil water evaporation. Mr. Sanchez. Tim Smith raises soybeans, corn, and cover crops on his family's farm in Iowa. Mr. Smith has implemented advanced agriculture practices that are improving his farm's soil and reducing the nitrates left behind from fertilizer. Additionally, Mr. Smith's farm has also become a demonstration farm where he teaches and shows other farmers the benefits and importance of cover crops and better soil management. Anita Adalja is the farm manager of Arcadia Center for Sustainable Food and Agriculture's 2-acre farm site right here in Washington, D.C. The farm only uses sustainable growing practices to create a more equitable food system by increasing food access, sustainable farming, farmer training, and farm-to-school education. Ms. Adalja teaches new farmers, students, and the public about sustainable agriculture through hands-on community engagement. Anita? Keith Burns and his brother own and operate their family farm in Nebraska. Mr. Burns also created a small company, Green Cover Seed, which has become one of the nation's leading providers of cover crop information and seed and has enabled him to spread his innovative ideas to hundreds of other farmers. He spends countless hours educating farmers and ranchers about the importance of soil health and carbon sequestration through field days, workshops, and conferences. Keith? Erin Fitzgerald Sexton is the Senior Vice President of Global Sustainability at the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, a forum for the dairy community to work together pre-competitively to foster research, measurement, and innovation for sustainability from farm to table. Under Erin's leadership, the Innovation Center conducted environmental impact assessment studies, which led to an industry-wide voluntary carbon reduction goal and tools and resources to measure and track progress. Ms. Sexton? Martin Kleinschmidt is the owner of an organic farm in Nebraska. He has been a climate-friendly farmer for almost 30 years and has decades of experience teaching other farmers how to farm in more sustainable and climate-friendly ways. Mr. Kleinschmidt also built and installed a solar array that produces over half of the farm's electricity and is now working with farmers around the area to source and install solar panels on farms and rural homes to increase rural renewable energy production and reduce fossil fuel use. Mr. Kleinschmidt. Two more to go here. So Jiff Martin. Jiff, is that right? Did I get that right? Oh, good. Also no formal name Jennifer. So Jiff Martin is the Sustainable Food System Associate Educator for the University of Connecticut Extension. She has worked for over 12 years on food and agriculture issues in the state, helping residents discover local agriculture, connecting kids to real food to help them grow up healthy, and researching community food security in Connecticut's 169 towns. Additionally, she leads a team of educators to assist new farmers in production and farmland management and works with consumers and businesses to get locally grown products in their food and gardening budgets. Jiff? And last but not least, Dr. Donald Tyler is a soil management researcher with the University of Tennessee's Biosystems Engineering and Soil Science Department. When he arrived in Tennessee, soil erosion rates were some of the highest in the United States. His research and contributions in the area of non-tillage cropping systems, I can honestly say I've never said that before. Non-tillage cropping systems have resulted in reduced soil erosion by up to 95%, enhanced soil carbon storage, and increased soil biodiversity. Please join us on the stage. These are our Agriculture Champs of Change. Thank you for all the work that you do, and let's get a round of applause as Secretary Vilsack joins us on stage. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Secretary Vilsack. A big round of applause for all our champs and for our speakers. So you're now going to hear first and foremost from these incredible leaders about their best practices and innovations. I'm excited to announce our first panel of producer champions, and they're all welcome to come back on stage. We've got Trey Hill, Larry Kundal, Tim Smith, Buddy Allen, Loretta Jouse, and Jesus Sanchez. If you would also please welcome to the stage their moderator, Pam Yonke, also known, big round of applause, also known by her radio personality, which many of you I'm sure know, the fabulous farm babe of the Wisconsin Farm Report, who is currently an expert in technology and media, but no stranger to agriculture. Pam grew up on her family's 200-acre dairy farm and has recently been named Farm Broadcaster of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Pam and our panel.
Well, greetings. We have got some fantastic stories to share with you all through the afternoon hours. First, housekeeping, kids. Let's make sure the green tag's out of the way. And smiles, because for the next 45 minutes, you are the face of agriculture to a lot of people on the World Wide Web. So let's keep that in mind, all right? I've had the pleasure of getting a chance to visit with some of the panelists as we've gotten ready for the Champs experience. What I'd like to do, each one of them has a very unique story on how they come to be so engaged in sustainable agriculture. I want them to focus in specifically on those bullet points we discussed, what you're most proud of. Now, Larry, I know you're smiling underneath this mustache there. It's there, really, I know that. Now, from Wyoming, he is a busy man in the cow-calf industry. Got about 400 mama cows that he's got waiting for him when he gets done here. And as you heard in his biography, he specializes in trying to make sure he's doing the most with the water available. Talk to me a little bit, Larry, about what you think is the most important piece of the puzzle you bring as a champion. Just
Thank
something
you.
a little easy.
Something easy right off. Well, in an area that only has about 9 to 12 inches of moisture a year, water is always important. We found it's more important as time goes on. It's going to be more important than oil, probably not in the near future. So that's that, and how to use the water and how to make it more efficient is a focus of almost everybody in my part of the country. We all know that we can't do it without water, so that's probably the main thing.
I agree. And that's a perfect segue to our man from the West. Jesus, you're trying to do it with basically no water in California. He's in the San Joaquin Valley, and that's a spot that is deficit, as we've all heard quite often. But yet you're still able to come together with enough technology to come up with a valuable tomato crop, almonds, and several other products. Talk to us a little bit about the innovations that you may not have chosen to be engaged in, but almost been forced to be engaged in because of those resource lack of, I should say.
Well, the things that we had to do to keep farming over there, we had to use cover crops, use manures and gypsum, because the quality of water is so poor that we had to manage the salts in the water, and we were able to survive, keep farming the way we still do. You know, last 2 years we didn't have no water for our district, 0% allocation. So we had to really focus on cover crops. Cover crops really changed the way we retain the little rain that we have in the field. So we keep doing it and converting those soils a lot better than used to be years ago.
Well, from the dry west to the land of 10,000 lakes, she's my dairy farmer on the panel. We've got Loretta Jost from Gibbons, Minnesota, who is an organic dairy producer there. One of the things that Loretta and I talked about was the quality of water. You have some concerns as a nature lover, a biologist by training, with the amount of water that we in the Midwest are tiling into systems. You've got some concerns that it's not just going to be about volume, it is going to be about that quality issue, even in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think when we came to the farm with those foundational principles of ecology and you started looking around, it was a bit of a challenge for us, trial and error, to try and figure out how do we connect all those dots from our ecology training. You have to support a farm, and we couldn't turn our back on the natural resources and the human resources that supported the farm operation. So trying to do that was challenging. And so watching all this water going off the land in the Midwest, knowing that we, even in the land of 10,000 lakes, are having water issues already in some parts of the state, it's one of my key areas of concern.
Yep, and we traveled just a little farther south. My corn bean grower, Tim Smith, is here from Iowa, and you too. Although you may be quite a bit farther north in the hypoxia area that gets talked about quite a little bit, you are very conscientious about what's happening with the water that leaves your land, where it's going, and what's happening farther downstream.
That's correct. I may be unique on this panel since I may have 9 or 10 inches of rain in a 2-week period. And that causes problems for soil erosion, but it also causes issue with nitrates that might filter through my tile lines because our land is tiled because it is so wet at times. And some of the practices I've been able to put into place have mitigated that nitrate loss through a wood chip bioreactor and using cover crops to sequester the nitrates and keep them on the soil as carbon. and organic matter. So.
Very good. You know, one thing that Secretary Vilsack pointed out is how we need to kind of tell our story. We need to build those bridges. Our next panelist is doing just that. He's in Maryland. Trey has done an excellent job going where many production farmers would not necessarily want to go, and that's working very, very closely with environmental groups. Trey, you've got a really interesting philosophy on why this is something that should have been happening a long time ago. In Maryland, it absolutely must if production agriculture is going to continue to grow.
I think so. I come from a very progressive farm. My father was always very progressive, very sustainable, and that it has sustained, 50, 60 years. So I think now it's just a matter of figuring out what the progressive people are going to do, what is sustainable moving forward, or as I call it, responsible farming. And I think that that's going to be working with larger groups of people. We all want clean water, so I kind of went to the environmental community and said, why are they after me? Well, they think I'm polluting the water. So the natural thing to do would be to fight back and say that I'm not, but instead I kind of embraced it and said, well, how do we improve? How can we put our heads together? Or how can you raise money to help me? You guys have a stronger lobby than I do in the state of Maryland, so what can we use? What programs can we procure together to get a cover crop funding, which we've gotten cover crop funded for 100% of the state. Our state's very green, and I'm not the only farmer 100% cover cropped, but there's a lot of other farmers that are doing it as well. And the initiative, I think, is helping to clean up the bay through that partnership of working together.
Yep, like you said, a lot of eyes on your particular acreage, and you're not just playing with small acres. You've got about 10,000 acres.
Yeah, it's not always a happy situation. I mean, we have environmentalists that sue farmers and farmers that fight back, and I just think as a leader we need to do it, and as part of my business model, I think that being sustainable or being responsible socially as well as economically and environmentally all has to be part of that. If you look at some of the bigger corporations around ag business, they're really hitting that initiatives, and I think that's going to be demanded by the consumer, whether it's the people that own the land that I rent from or the consumer that's eating the food. They're going to want to know my carbon footprint. They're going to want to know what's going into the water. So I'm trying to get kind of ahead of that and build a relationship and build the foundation for that so that we can have clean water and solid food production and secure food production for the U.S.
And I think that's a theme that all of us here at the front table have, is trying to find the cohesiveness where we can get along. Buddy Allen, you're a perfect example of that in Mississippi. A rice producer, so water is critically important to your crop, obviously, but you also are working all the time, both in the state and beyond, to build those bridges with groups that might not understand exactly what you do and when you do it.
Well, absolutely. Rice is a significant water-using crop, which gives a lot of opportunity to make an impact with conservation and stewardship. And we've worked very diligently, and I'm really proud of the partnerships that we have with our commodity groups like the Rice Federation, as well as regulatory groups in the state and federal levels. NRCS, we can't say enough thank yous to NRCS for the good work and opportunities you guys give us, and both technical and financial assistance that goes so far to further the things that are being talked about today. Then also the local producer groups. So collectively we've made these partnerships, and we've learned how to raise rice in the Deep South using about half the water we did 10 years ago. So we're making a difference. We are developing best management practices and conservation activities that yield productivity and an increased opportunity for farmers. So there is adoption and there is true sustainability that comes from it.
So let's just take a look at some of the specific conservation-related practices that all of you have implemented on your own. Larry, I want to talk to you about this carbon credit business. So how well did that go over in Wyoming, trying to get your fellow cowboys to think about carbon credit sales?
You know, Wyoming's pretty simple. If it's profitable and the land stays there for the next generation, people are really pretty interested in doing it. If you put a name on it from Washington, it may not be so popular. But you know, Secretary Vilsack said, "What is sustainable? Think about that." And I'm like, I've taken that out of my vocabulary. If it's profitable and it's good for the environment and the next generation can use it, guess what? That is the definition of sustainable. But it's in a way that a lot of people think a little bit differently about it. And so, I'll stop there.
That sounds good. But so the carbon credit situation
Oh, the
is
carbon
good
credit.
in Wyoming?
No. I had a friend that was in NRCS, and he was talking about it, and that was, a few years ago, and it was pretty popular, and it said, if nothing else, we need carbon credits we're doing this work anyway, maybe we can get paid for it, and it's kind of an insurance policy if something else happens. So we got together with NRCS, we put a package together, we got certified. I've got a contract that's never paid $1 yet. But we're still sequestering, and I don't see anything different other than we're just not getting specifically paid for it.
That's right. I own stock in the Green Bay Packers. I ain't
There you
going to
go.
get anything off
Yeah.
that either, but I feel good about it. So, by golly. Jesus, let's talk about what's going on in California. Now, how quickly did you have to really step up how you farmed in relation to the water that was available? That's not really what Mother Nature gives to you. That's what others decide you're going to have. So tell us what practices you're most often showing other farmers to try to keep them at least moving forward and having a livelihood.
Well, like I say, we're using cover crops, and depends what is the situation, how many wells you have on the farm and everything. Don't base in the water we're gonna get. Even if we get some rain, probably don't get nothing from our districts. So we had to really focus on what we have, and just do the best right there. You know, when cover crops, like I said, we be able to grow and sustain our quality and quantity of our products, especially the quality is increasing, you know, year after year. You know, we are recognized in Sano Farms, one of the best quality tomato producers in our valley.
Is there any crop that you had to walk away from logistically? You just knew you couldn't do it anymore?
Exactly, like crops like cotton, corn, definitely we cannot, wheat, we cannot do those kind of crops no more.
Well, we live, we learn. So Loretta, let's talk a little bit about those beautiful bovines back at home. You were talking with me about the 400 acres or so that you and Martin are working with at all times. You have a very deep philosophy on how those cows, that cover crop, which would be the grass they're grazing on, how it all is coming together for not only a healthy soil profile, which impacts water.
Yeah, as I was explaining to these friends before, sometimes I feel like we fell into organic and sustainable production. Automatically, because you're a dairy, you need feed for the cows, and it has to be a variety of feeds. So we have 4 or 5 different crops we grow, and some of them are kind of non-conventional. And we put those on a 6-year rotation. That 6-year rotation is really important for this building the soil structure and supporting the soil biology, which in turn impacts water quality and some of the crop fertility. Then, because we're organic, again, we use the manure from the cows to fertilize the crops, actually to feed the living organisms in the soil, which in turn feed the crops. And then on top of that, we do the conservation and the wildlife projects for fun, and not completely oblivious to how that all would tie together at the end. But those are the results we get is clean water, healthy animals, and a farm that supports our family and meets our objectives in terms of that larger food system picture of having to support human and natural resources and economics and the environmental concerns and human and social justice issues.
Yep. Well, and with your position being, 90 miles outside of the Twin Cities, that's a pretty good learning lab area. I'm glad you're there, kiddo. Very good, very good. Tim, you and I were talking a little bit, too, about where we go from here. We make the investment in time and money on these practices, not necessarily knowing what the payoff's going to be, trying to encourage the next generation to get in. When you're a champion traveling across Iowa and beyond, how receptive are the farmers about the messages that you're bringing?
Well, I think at this point they're very curious to see what's going on with cover crops. I try to stress the longer-term vision in terms of protecting the soil. Erosion is not sustainable. If we lose our topsoil, then we're going to suffer. Next generations are going to suffer a lot. Iowa's been blessed with so much topsoil that even though we've lost a fair amount in the last 150 years, that trend is not sustainable. So using cover crops and different tillage practices, I try to just remind farmers that to leave the land better than when they first started farming it. And that's a goal of a lot of farmers, but I don't think they realize perhaps the erosion that's taken place over the last 50 to 100 years. So.
Right. The work that has to go in. Yep, very true. So, Trey, I want to talk to you a little bit again about the relationship situation. You are involved with the river keepers, not just in casual conversation, but helping out on some of their boards and that. I got to ask you, the environmental groups you work with in Maryland, do they really detest agriculture, or what do you learn walking into that den?
It's a mixed bag. The folks there's reasonable people on both sides of every argument, and it's a matter of finding the reasonable people within that and letting them have the discussion so you can exchange intellectual property and come up with solutions. So there are farmers that aren't willing, and there are environmentalists that aren't willing. We've had some lawsuits where environmentalists sued farmers and whatnot, and it was very unhealthy for everybody. It just kind of galvanized everyone. I didn't agree with that. So I think that we need more of a common ground, and I don't think that the ground that is common is that far apart. I mean, wanting clean water and good food is really a fairly fundamental principle in life. So if you think about it down to the bare bones fundamental terms of what you're trying to do, I don't think that we're coming from two different places. And like what Secretary Vilsack was saying is actually one of my big things is why do we all, disagree with one another? So with the food production, for example, I have a CSA on a farm that I till. We lease it out. It's a nonprofit with a focus on ag education. They bring all the school kids there. They go to the gardens. They grow it. And it's really healthy for me. And I don't view a 10-acre CSA as my competition. To me, it's a complement to what I do. Having school kids to my farm to see big silos and big combines doesn't teach them where food comes from. It teaches them a wonderful farm, and it's really fun. But they also, I think, we need to keep in touch with having a garden, because people don't have gardens. We have a garden. So I think that there's a lot of common ground and a lot of commonalities amongst everyone. It's just a matter of getting everyone on the same page to realize that we do have things in common, and that there are things. I want soil protection. I want soil conservation. I want clean water. And being a big farmer is not an excuse not to do those things, which is kind of where I disagree with some of my peer group. But I also don't think that the other side is the same way. So I think we can have responsible, sustainable farms of all shapes and sizes. We can have young people, old people. We can have organic, non-organic. And there's good and bad in all those products. But if we can get the reasonable people together, we can really learn a lot.
Buddy, what about you? In Mississippi, what kinds of questions do you get, be it from your neighbors, people that you're going to church with, or when you take the message of Mississippi agriculture to the state capitol? What are some of the most common questions or curiosity points that you have to field?
Well, Mississippi's changing. We've got two primary issues. One's a water quantity issue with our Mississippi alluvial aquifer declining at a rate that's unhealthy, which is somewhat fresh news to the ag community. And as growers like myself and water users like myself realize that we're either going to be better users of that resource or regulation is near. They really start looking critically at their operations and what they can do differently to be a more sound user of water. And because of that, we've had somewhat of a renaissance in learning how to irrigate in a really volatile climate. We have almost 60 inches of annual rainfall, and we're completely dependent upon irrigation, believe it or not, because we have these volatile storm events that bring a significant amount of rainfall. So we've really learned how to use management practices through NRCS to combine the existing structures that have been installed with sound management and irrigate when we need to based on soil moisture, using new techniques, adding flocculants and polymers and doing lots of different things to increase infiltration in scenarios where cover crops may not fit. Polyacrylamid's a new practice that we've introduced we're really excited about to address water quality where it was used for erosion control in the past. We're seeing new opportunities all the time, and we realize that we've got to do it. And then switching gears, we're adjacent to the Gulf, and we feel like we've got a big responsibility towards reducing the impact of epoxy on the Gulf of Mexico. So nutrient reduction is one of our primary goals. Mississippi was the first state to submit a formal nutrient reduction plan, and we'd like to make the claim that we're the last chance to dilute that river with clean water, and we're trying.
Oh, that's good. We applaud you for that. All right, for each of you on the panel, give me a sense of where you go from here. We're congratulating you today on the accomplishments, but you know as well as I do, there's tomorrow, there's cows waiting at home, there's plants waiting to be taken care of. So what kinds of short-term and maybe longer-term goals do you have for your operation? And is there somebody in the wings, be it a farm manager, the next generation, that will carry that baton? Because these things are not accomplished overnight. How about that one?
Well,
He's so glad he sat next to me.
you know, I think one of the big worries that we have is when you go across the west is all of the little towns that are just drying up. And there's just nothing there but a main street anymore. And so if we can get more people that are interested in farming and ranching on those farms, and they start buying equipment and doing things again, maybe we can rejuvenate that. And at the same time, the farms themselves need to have younger people there. One of the things a couple of things that I'm doing that I'm excited about. One is we are mentoring a young family that works with us that we're going to bring in. Either they will stay on our ranch or they will be in a position to either rent or buy another place. And I think that's what we've got to do is bring that next generation in. And the second thing is with my work with National SARE or Western SARE is going around and talking to producers about these things that we're talking about today and the research that's needed from the producers. What do they need, not what do the researchers need to look at? I mean, starting from the bottom up and not from the top down. And so when a producer comes and asks that through the USDA program, we're able to provide some research dollars that I'm excited about because I've seen things happening from that, from water quality to cover crops is a big deal, of course. Hoop houses a few years ago. All of those things are pieces of the puzzle that I think are exciting for me to be part of.
Agreed. How about you, Jesus?
Well, in our area is the people will see by using less fuel in the fields, less passes in the tractor on the fields, and when cover crops, they are able to see not only increasing our productivity in the field, but also seeing the air a lot more clean, less pollution, and the air less pollution, and you know, a lot better clean air to breathe. I think it'll be real noticeable, and it'll be important in our area, not only for our area, but everybody.
You make a long-term business plan, Jesus?
Yes, you know, try to show in to neighbors and the world that it's really important to do that. It's really important to have clean atmosphere for the future generation to come that'll be excited on the farming.
Loretta, what about you and Marvin? How are you guys planning out for the next 5-10 years? What kind of to-do list do you have for him, and what kinds of goals do you have?
I don't think you want to get into that. But I think most recently my focus has been on outreach and education, and I did some of that with our Cooperative Organic Valley and really enjoyed it. But the most difficult place for me to talk about that was right in my own community. And I was feeling very, very badly about that, and yet I know the hearts of my neighbors. We are blessed with some of the best neighbors you can imagine. There can be difficulties living next to an organic farmer with weed issues and all the other challenges we have. And then there's livestock that know the weak spots is in the fence. But what we ended up doing started about 4 years ago, is just fixing a nice dinner. It was done by a professional chef with the good china out in the pasture. And we kept the group small, and it was all women, and bring them out to discuss a food-focused issue in a comfortable setting with wine. Lots of wine helps. It was just a good place where we can share and address some of these issues that you were talking about, because we all do have common ground and we all want the same things. So find it and let's visit about it, and then let's together as a community decide where to go with that. In the same vein, and the fifth generation of the Joust family is in the audience there with 2 brothers at home helping do the work in their own lives. What?
Right there, Heather. Wave your hand, Heather.
Yeah, and so we're in the beginning of conversations about the future of the farm and where that's going. And one thing that's been terribly rewarding for Martin and I is that other than keeping the farm in the family, the conservation focus that we have on the farm is one thing that they want to make sure stays. You know, you could be thinking, well, you'd be making more money to pass on to the next generation if you were doing, you know, some other things differently on the farm, but that's a value to them, which means a lot to us.
Very good point. Very
Thanks.
good point. Very good point. Heather's right there in the front. Tim, what about you? When you think about 5 years, 10 years, what kinds of bucket list kind of things do you have?
Well, I'm just learning, I guess, just starting this process. I wish I started 20 years ago. I'd been a lot farther ahead, but I think introducing a third crop in a corn-soybean rotation would be beneficial. I guess I think 5-10 years down the road, if I get closer to retirement, you know, writing a sustainable farm lease to the next operator.
Explain that.
Well, just specifying the way the farm will be farmed. You know, we can put restrictions on how things are done. I don't want to have what I've started to be undone by a few tillage passes. So I think that's real important, and that discussion is real important. So.
And you and I were talking also about you being proactive that way might be the best way, as opposed to the people you're selling your product to telling you how they want it to be.
Sure. I think as more of agriculture realizes that the food industry is going to be asking for more sustainable practices done on the farm, they may not want to pay for that, but nevertheless, I think the expectation is there from the consumer to farm in a more sustainable way. Mm-hmm. So I think that will come down the pipe too.
Trey, what about you? You got a 5-year, 10-year list on some specifics that you'd really love to come back as a champion 5 years from now and tell us we're accomplished in Maryland with these relationships you're building?
Well, I'd like to grow. That's my number one goal as a farmer. I want to be more successful and grow. I'd like to till more. I'm planning. I think that with the cover crops and everything we're doing, we're making a lot of progress. I still have a lot to learn. I mean, everything's a work in progress. Every time I screw something up, it's a test plot, regardless of the size. So I think that all of that is building forward. I think that the relationships are going to continue. I think as the environment, as my landlords age and the next generation takes over, they're all a lot more environmentally aware. And I think I'm going to be starting to see a lot of leases like Tim's. I think I may push those leases, and that will differentiate me from hopefully from some of my competitors. Some will follow, some will stay the way they are. And I think that will build healthier soils. I want a soil health initiative. And I'd say in terms of starting to monitor soil health and compare it to in different tillage systems and different systems of what I'm growing and start to really track it over time. I have soil tests that are 30 years old from stuff that my father tilled up and through now, so we can measure organic matter and CEC, not health. So I think those will be good measurements. I think 10 years down the road, I think big data is going to really start to help us out. Big data is scary, but I think by the same token, now that all my machinery is communicating its information with the cloud, it's got yield data, planting data, all going to the cloud. I think that we can take that. Enterprise software is becoming big in the farm business. There's people in Silicon Valley building software for me to have enterprise software. And I think right now, while it's tracking financials, it's going to start to track nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon. So hopefully I can become carbon net zero, start to track where my inputs are coming from and get a really complex, full-scale global idea of what my small farm in Maryland is doing in terms of carbon sequestration and where the nitrogen's going. That may be a dream for 10 years. As far as really long-term, my daughter does not want to farm. She's 8. My son, who was 5, has made it clear that he wants to go to the Barcelona Academy at 14. So I don't know whether to hope that pans out or not, but we'll see. If he does, hopefully he'll continue to farm.
I was going to say, those are challenges beyond this panel. Good luck on that. All right, buddy, what about you? 5-year, 10-year thoughts on where your Mississippi operation is going to be?
Well, I hate to end this on a sour note, but in case nobody's mentioned the economic climate change that's happened in production agriculture in America in the last 3 years, but farm revenues are off more than 50% from where they were 3 years ago. Title I support programs are down significantly. A vast percentage of rural America is not owned by local landowners any longer. It's become more of a corporate structure which doesn't contribute to communities and small business the way it used to, and it's a travesty. So because of that, I'm going to be very careful, and I'm going to focus on risk management and diversity and good planning, because this is a cyclical business. It's a volatile business. There's a lot at stake, like Mr. Vilsack described. I appreciated his comments this morning. And one of my most important goals is to stay close to people like the people on this panel who've got a lot of solutions and a lot of good ideas, and the kind of networks and the way we can glean from each other to address these issues will be what makes us successful in the end. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here today and to network with guys like that are on this panel today.
Very good point. You've read all their bios. I'm not, I can't, no clock. I don't have my cell phone, so I have no idea what time it is or how much time has lapsed. But I'd like to give each one of the panelists just a couple moments.
She's up there.
We're good?
5
Cool.
minutes.
Thank you. So I'd like to give each one of the panelists an opportunity. They've worked a long time on putting together their blogs and some of the rest of the information that you've seen. And I'd like them each to take their own individual time and explain just how you want to be remembered as a champion. So, buddy, I'll let you crawl out of that don't want to be a Debbie Downer kind of situation and end your presentation on whatever kind of note you'd like.
Well, I thought that was the end, Pam, but you got that good radio voice and you just keep coming. But it's an honor to be here. We're making a difference. Everybody that's being honored today, I'm proud to be in conjunction with. I've learned a lot already today. These are real problems and there are real solutions, and we've got great partnerships. A lot of them are represented here. When I look around the room, from NRCS and Dr. Honeycutt to my colleague representing Extension that'll be on the next panel, and I'm honored to be here. I'm grateful to be a farmer. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to work with companies that are developing concepts and products that will make a difference, and thank you.
Go ahead, Trey.
It's an honor to be here. The local press and everything I got at home was pretty exciting. I didn't, usually farmers aren't in the papers and stuff, and everyone was really excited. I got so many calls and emails and stuff about it, that it is really neat that we're getting that I'm getting this accolade. But I think that's really an exciting time in farming right now. Farming's always exciting because it changes every day. Every morning we always go to Plan B when we start the day. So we're kind of used to adjusting and changing. So the climate change thing I think is big. I think we're getting bigger rains, and I think we need to adapt to that. And I think that you're going to see farmers starting to do that. I come from a long line of farmers that have always been progressive, and I think that the progression now is going to be a much greener farming. It's going to be cover crops. It's going to be winter annuals. It's going to be winter grasses. And I think that all this is just really exciting. I think the food movement is exciting, even as a large grower that doesn't market to that segment. I think that that's really good and healthy that people are worried about what they're eating. I mean, one of the biggest problems in the United States is that people eat too much. It's discouraging to a grower because you're like, well, what are we doing? And it's not the farmer's fault for what we produce. It's the way it's consumed and the education. So I think that the whole food movement, the environmental movement, I think in the short term is probably negative on farmers. It's going to be a huge mindset change. But I think as we start to accept that mindset change and that philosophy and accept it and embrace it, I think we can really accomplish a lot and improve on what is already a tremendously great food supply in the U.S.
Outstanding. I agree. Tim?
I guess just being part of the change. I think back when I was 13 driving a John Deere A to a tractor that drives itself today. But even with cover crops and these new practices that have been talked about, that's part of that change, and that's just the forefront of what the future is about.
Loretta?
I think for me, it's just excitement over the common thinking that we're having. I mean, when we started farming and you're kind of out there all by yourself as an organic farmer and you're busy on the farm and sometimes it's hard to get off, you can lose touch with people. So to be here, to hear President Obama's speeches where he always drills down on issues that are near and dear to my heart, Secretary Vilsack's speech today, I can only do so much, and I do what I can, and I'm committed to doing more, but knowing that there are organizations out there, I can help support them. We have one that we belong to, Land Stewardship Project, that supports beginning farmers and works from the whole front end, from that end to the policy. So that kind of collaboration is really important and exciting to me, and as scary as climate change is looking on the farm and interstate, I'm feeling very hopeful and encouraged by gatherings like this and
Lives you up.
support, definitely.
All right, Jesus?
Well, thanks for, it's one of my goals, and thanks for being here. That, farming is really excited in the United States. And it's more excited that the farming will be made by farmers. Because farmers know how to produce the best quality of the food in the farm. And I hope it doesn't change that, to have, instead of farmers, who have corporations that's gonna be regulating or doing our food. Farmer can create and do the best for our soils, for the future, and mainly for our feed.
Jim? Very good. Larry?
I got my first cow when I was 6 years old. That's been 60 years ago. There's been a lot of changes since then. Cows used to walk 6 miles to water. Now they walk a quarter of a mile. We put in water lines. We've done a lot of things. I've seen a lot of changes. I'm excited to rub shoulders with people like this. I think it bodes well for the future of agriculture, and I'm really grateful for the award, but I really represent my neighbors because they do those things too. And so I'm just excited to be here and glad to meet you folks, and thank you.
Still got that cow?
She,
In one way or another.
yeah, she's here somewhere.
Well, I can't find my cue, but I think that my panels, if you get a chance to visit with them afterward, please do. They have fascinating stories. They can go more in depth one-on-one. I enjoyed my conversations with each and every one of them. My pleasure to be moderator of this panel. I am the fabulous Farm Babe. Thank you very much for having us.